Well, I think we've probably got enough people here tonight to kick off. Um, I'm your substitute for Adrian. Adrian's double booked himself, um, so can't be here tonight. So he's asked me to just push a few switches, and hopefully I can seamlessly link up the amazing talk that we're just about to hear from John Webb and the pre-recorded message that Adrian has left us. So tonight's speaker, as you probably know, is Emeritus Professor John Webb from the Trobe University, who will talk about what is underneath all the grassy plains that we know and love, the geology and the geomorphology. So I'm guessing lots of clay and lots of basalt rocks. But oh no, I'm wrong. Okay.
No, you're right.
I'll let him talk. Thank you, John. Go for it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's share the screen. Okay, tonight I'm going to talk to you about the geology of the volcanic plains of Western Victoria. So I'm a geologist, and the terminology that I'm going to use is kind of second nature to me. So it's possible I'm going to use terms that you are not familiar with. And so if you find this particularly puzzling at any point in the talk, just stick your hand up and I'll see if I can clarify things. But, and I'm also more than happy to answer as many questions at the end as you like. Okay, so the thing about the Western Plains of Victoria is there's lots of volcanoes there and lots of lava flows, and there's been more or less continuous eruptions and lava flows for about 8 million years, a bit longer depending how you count it. Right, so in the black here, we see all the lava flows extending from the Melbourne area over here, right across to the South Australian border. In red here are the most recent eruptions that are less than 50,000 years old at Mount Eccles, Budge Bim, and Mount Napier. But you can see that the area of volcanics is very extensive, but it's not continuous. There are areas where they're covered in places and areas where older rocks stick through the volcanics. If we look at the topography now, we can see that some of the volcanic eruptions occurred within the highland areas in Western Victoria, and others occurred across the extensive area of plains through here. So what I want to do is basically talk about how they erupted, when they erupted, and how we can tell them apart. So overall, they're called the Newer Volcanic Province. They extend about 410 kilometres east-west, and the total area is more than 19,000 square kilometres. So this makes it a very significant volcanic province. It's not the biggest volcanic province in the world by any means. There are quite a few that are larger, but it's still quite significant on a world scale. There's over 400 what we might call volcanic centres and over 700 eruption points. So the difference here is some of the volcanic centres have more than one eruption point. But basically you can say there's more than 400 different volcanoes. So this means it's, like I said, a pretty significant field. For at least the past 4 million years, eruptions have occurred more or less continuously, and so that means on average there's been an eruption about every 11,000 years. So quite frequent. So this is a map from a paper by Julie Boyce showing in grey the lavas and in the dots the volcanoes. So the red dots are what we call lava shields. So these are fairly low elevation volcanoes that are built up predominantly by lava. In the black triangles are what we call scoria cones, And so these are built up by eruptions of volcanic ash. And we'll go into that a bit more detail as we go along. And then the blue and yellow symbols down here refer to what are called maars. And a maar is a particular type of very explosive volcanic eruption that we'll talk about more as we go along too. On this diagram, the volcanics have been divided into two sub-provinces. Up here is what's called the Central Highlands sub-province, and through here is the Western Plains sub-province. There's some differences between them. You'll notice there's a lot of volcanoes concentrated up in the Central Highlands, whereas they tend to be a bit more scattered on the Western Plains. But there's a lot more lava on the Western Plains compared to the Central Highlands. And we'll talk about that a bit more as we go along too. Just while we're here, point out that over in South Australia, there are some volcanoes as well. And two in particular, these two here, that's Mount Gambier and that's Mount Shank. And Mount Shank just here is the most recent volcanic eruption in the whole lava field. And that occurred a mere 5,000 years ago. Now, I want to talk a little bit about remote sensing, because remote sensing is really handy for studying these basalt lavas and mapping them, because it can differentiate their extent quite accurately, and it can also help us to understand their age. So some time ago, the whole of Victoria was flown by a plane that had a magnetometer on it and an airborne radiometer. So the magnetometer measures the magnetic strength of the rocks underneath the aircraft. And that's basically a reflection of the concentration of magnetic minerals. So that's particularly useful for mapping basalts, because basalts contain small amounts of a very magnetic mineral called magnetite. The radiometer measures natural gamma radiation. So sitting in your home right now, all of us are being irradiated by very small amounts of natural radiation that's being given off by the decay of three minerals: potassium, uranium, and thorium. Now, the amount of radiation being given off is tiny, and it's not dangerous for us, but we can measure it. And different soils and rocks contain different amounts of potassium, uranium, and thorium. So that means we can actually differentiate different rock types based on their gamma radiation signal. It just comes from the surface. 90% of the signal comes from the top 30 centimetres. So what we're mapping is surface outcrops or surface soil. We can collect this by what they call scintillometers, and then we can use it to give an image in three colours: red, green, and blue, where red is potassium, green is thorium, and blue is uranium. So that just means when we look at one of these images, if there's lots of red there, that's the high potassium areas. Now, a couple of other things about the gamma rays: they're blocked by water, so lakes and wet ground appear black. And in terms of basalts, they're particularly handy, the radiometer images, the airborne radiometrics, because basalts contain potassium when they're freshly erupted. But as they weather, that potassium is leached out and goes into the groundwater. So fresh basalt has high potassium. And if we colour it red, fresh basalt will look red on one of these radiometric images. As it weathers, it progressively loses the potassium and the colour changes to brown and then to green. So what am I talking about? We can use this to differentiate basically three ages of basalts in Victoria. And this is important in terms of grasslands. So the oldest basalts, the first eruptions started about 8 million years ago, but they cranked up around about 4 million years ago when there were quite a lot of eruptions. And in the subsequent 4 million years, the basalts have weathered quite a lot. So they have fairly smooth topography, quite thick soil profiles, up to 15 metres thick. And on the radiometric images, they look kind of greenish because all the potassium's gone. The second phase of eruption was around about 2 million years ago, and that was actually the peak period of volcanic activity in Western Victoria. That's when most eruptions occurred. These have had 2 million years to weather, so they too are quite weathered. The topography tends to be gently undulating. The soils are a few meters thick and they've got basalt floaters, bits of basalt scattered through them. And on the radiometric images, they look blue-green. The youngest basalts are those that are less than 1 million years old. And these basalts we often call stony risers. And the reason they're called stony risers is they have a very irregular topography with relatively high areas, the risers that are very stony, and in between them lower areas that may or may not be stony. The soils are very thin, there's lots of basalt boulders, and the potassium content is still pretty high. So they look red or brown on these radiometric images, which I'm about to show you. So I want to start off by looking at this area down here, which is around Portland and Warrnambool. So this is the topography of the area. So on this, blue is low and it goes up to orange as high. So this is Mount Napier, which is a volcano, Mount Rouse, which is another volcano, Mount Eccles, Budge Bim, another volcano, and out here is a volcano which is quite low and isn't significant enough to actually have a name. So this is the aeromagnetic image of that area, exactly the same area. Now this kind of speckledy pattern here that we see scattered all across here, around here and over here indicates that those rocks have some magnetic minerals in them, and that's the typical signature of basalt. So the thing about mapping the basalts is because they weather and get a thick soil on top of them, often it's very difficult to see where the edge of the basalt is because it's obscured by the soil. But the magnetics tells you exactly where the edge of the basalt is, because even though it's weathered, it still has the magnetite in it, and that enables you to pick out the edge of the basalt actually very precisely. So here's Mount Napier again, Mount Rouse and Mount Eccles, Budge Bim. And what I'll point out now from Mount Napier is we can see this line going down here. And that's a lava flow that flowed out of Mount Napier and down a stream valley down to here. And from Budge Bim, we see another lava flow, the Tirandara lava flow, that extended down here. So the magnetics are really good for mapping out the extent of the basalts and finding out the edge of the lava flows. So this is the same area again, but this is one of these radiometric images that I've been talking about. So what we see here in the reddish colours around Mount Napier and Budge Bim are basalts that are quite young. So the date on Mount Napier is about 32 Ka. So Ka means 1,000 years. So it's 32,000 years old. Over at Mount Rouse, we can see these basalt flows here, which look brownish, are older. They're about 300 to 380,000 years old. And up here in the green and the blue-green down here are much older basalts. So the red indicates the amount of potassium. The young basalts have high levels of potassium. The slightly older basalts have lost some of their potassium, and then the basalts that are a few million years old, so big MA stands for million years, 2 million years old and 4 million years old have lost their potassium. And so they look bluish greenish. So if we look here, we can see Budge Bim, and out here we have this unnamed volcano. So if we were in a room together at this stage, I would ask you all to guess what age this volcano is and what age Budge Bim Mount Eccles is, and I'd do it on a show of hands. But since you're all hidden behind your screens, I'm probably just going to tell you. So as we can see, Budge Bim is about the same age as Mount Napier, in this case about 27,000 years old. And the unnamed volcano is about 4 million years old because it looks very similar to the colour we see through here. And it's so weathered that it's just a really quite a low hill in the landscape, which is why it hasn't justified getting a name. So some photographs of what we're talking about. Up here is Mount Napier. And this through here, this very stony area here, is the Harmon Valley flow, that long lava flow that flowed down the river valley from Mount Napier. And we can see abundant rocks in the landscape. This is covered with bracken, but in amongst it all, you can see all the rocks. These are basalt boulders, and these indicate that the lava flow is quite young because there hasn't been enough time to weather all the basalt at the surface to a thick clay-rich soil. Either side of the lava flow over here, we can see older basalts that are much more weathered and have a much smoother profile with basically no basalt boulders in the soil, because there's been such a long time period of weathering, several million years, that the basalt at the surface has all turned to clay. The Harmon Valley flow is notable for the fact that it has the biggest lava caves, lava tubes in Victoria. And so these are where the lava flowed beneath a surface crust and then kept flowing and drained the tube and left an open tube behind. Over most of Victoria, the lava flows flowed in a similar way, but they didn't drain the tubes. They just all, the lava just solidified in place. Within these lava caves, you can see lava stalagmites and little lava stalactites. They're quite interesting. The main ones close to the road are quite easy of access if you ever feel like going and having a look. So one of the things I have to emphasize at this point is the reason that we get these really long lava flows is that basalt lava is very fluid and can flow long distances. So this is Hawaiian lava flow, Mauna Loa, but it can maintain that fluidity, and it flows to the lowest point in the landscape, which is why it tends to fill river valleys and flow basically downhill and reasonably rapidly. So the thing about basalt lava flows is if there was a new eruption in the Western District and you were living out there at the time, where some of you may live, I'm not sure, and you looked out your window and you saw a lava flow approaching, you could run away from it. It's not going to flow so rapidly that you're going to be overwhelmed by it. Okay, so just going back to these again, so we can see now that this whole area is covered by a large area of lava, and that the lava flows span quite a range of ages. Okay, let's talk about a different area, and that's up in the highlands. So the basalts in the Central Highlands, rather than being these extensive lava flows across the plains, tend to be confined to river valleys. And so I just want to have a look at this one here and show you a few things about that. So this, once again, is the topography. This is lower elevation. This is higher elevation. That little hill there is a volcano. And I just want to draw your attention. We're going to look at this area through here, which doesn't look like much on the topography, but let's have a look and see what we can tell about it. So this is the magnetic image of exactly the same area. And so you recognize, of course, straight away that this is basalt lava. And so we can see that there were volcanoes here, and the lava flow then flowed down this valley. And there was another volcano up here supplying extra lava. And so the reason that we've got this long, narrow flow heading northwards is it just flowed down the river valley. So now if we go back, it's this river valley here. And we've got volcanoes up here. And here. And just over here, where my pointer is, that's that volcano there, and that's a lava flow extending out through here. This is the radiometric image. So what we see here, well, first of all, that black area there is water. So that's Lake Epilogue. And the dam wall is just there. This darker area here is the weathered basalt lava, and up through here. And so we can see that it's not orange or brown or red, it's quite greenish. So it's probably a couple of million years old. And the dates on this lava flow through here are around about 2 million. But in black here, I've superimposed the actual outcrop of the lava. And what you can see here is the lava flow extends further north than we can actually see it at the surface. So this area up here, the basalt has become covered by later sediments that have buried it. And if you walk across that area there, you can't see any basalt at all. But underneath your feet, the basalt lava flow continues, and the magnetic image can tell us that. Okay, so the remote sensing is very handy, but let's have a look at some photos. So this is a lava flow from Mount Fyans in Western Victoria. And what we can see here, so this basically the whole area we're looking at is a lava flow, but we can see these funny looking small plateaus that characterize this part of the lava flow just here. And so these are what are called stony rises because they're higher elevation than the surrounding area, and they're covered typically in basalt boulders. Now, how do these form? So people have looked at lava flows on Hawaii for a long period of time now, and what they've discovered is that you can get a pulse of lava coming out of the vent and flying across the flanks of the volcano there, and it'll form a crust. And then another pulse of lava will be injected underneath the crust, and in some places it'll inflate the crust and cause it to bulge upwards. So what this actually represents, these stony rises, is a second pulse of lava that's caused the overlying crust to inflate, to rise up just in some areas. In other areas, the crust is stuck to the stuff underneath and it doesn't rise up. And the overall pattern can be quite irregular. Now, we only see these stony rises on lava flows that are less than 1 million years old. And the reason for that is by the time you've had 1 million years of weathering, the stones and the boulders on the higher areas here have weathered and the clay's been washed down into the lower areas. The difference in elevation between the stony rise and the surrounding lower lying areas is removed. And after several million years of weathering, you just end up with a smooth plain with no stones. So this is a close-up of what a stony rise looks like. It's a rise and it's covered in stones. And you can see this here is actually the edge of the basalt flow. Out here we've got much older flows that are about 2 million years old that don't show any stones at all. So these stony rises are coming from a more recent eruption to the left of where this photograph's taken. If we look in detail at some of the stony rises, just in terms of the topography, we can see there's a cross-section down here, just how irregular the surface is. So this, once again, is a quite young lava flow. This one's about probably 400,000 years old. Once it gets to be a couple of million years old, it'll be totally smoothed out and it'll look like this area out here, which is an older lava flow about 2 million years old that this younger flow has partially flowed across. So this is the Stony Rise lava flows from Mount Rouse. So as we saw before, these are round about 300,000 years old. And this is the Stony Rise area through here. The flat area out here are older lava flows again that the Stony Rises have partially covered. Now, the really young Stony Rise eruptions, the ones less than 50,000 years old, the ones from Mount Napier and Budge Bim, are really stony. So in areas like Mount Rouse, the original vegetation there has been cleared, even on the Stony Rises. And although you can't grow crops on it, you can use it for grazing. But the young stuff around Mount Napier and Mount Eccles is really, really stony. And so it's not good for anything apart from National Park. And so the reason these areas here are national parks is that people decided they were no good for anything else, which is sad but true how a lot of our national parks were declared. Okay, one of the interesting things about the area, which I'm sure you've all seen, is the dry stone walls that are constructed across the Stony Rises. So these were constructed by people who were craftsmen who really knew how to build a wall and put it together dry with no cement whatsoever. And these are a notable feature of the landscape. And they've actually been declared of heritage significance in some areas. Okay, so what we see here in the foreground is the edge of a stony rise, less than 1 million years old. Through the middle ground here, older lavas, 2 to 4 million years old. And in the background here, we see a volcano. So this volcano has relatively steep sides on it, so that identifies it as a scoria cone. It's made of volcanic ash. So in Western Victoria on the plains, there's actually been so much lava that it's actually filled in the landscape. So there's been a lot of drilling done in the area, and there are also river valleys that have cut through it. And you can see that the pre-existing landscape before all the volcanic eruptions was quite hilly in places. And the lava flows, which are up to 50 metres thick in places, basically filled in the landscape and flattened it out. This is mainly in the Western Plains, not so much in the Central Highlands. And so where the rivers have cut through it, you can see the stony edges through here. That is the edge of the lava flow. And as I said, in some places, river valleys have cut through them, and other places, not so much. The basalt lava flows themselves have quite a lot of fractures in them. As they cool, they crack, and those cracks can transmit groundwater. So the basalt lavas in Western Victoria can contain quite a lot of groundwater. The quality of the groundwater may not be fantastic. In some places, it's quite saline. And in some places, you have springs coming out of the basalt and then feeding small creeks, then go down into the lake here, which I think is Lake Corangamite in this case, which is quite saline. The lakes across the Western District basalts vary enormously in salinity from quite fresh, like Lake Bolac, for example, to very saline, like Lakes Biak and Corangamite. And the difference is entirely whether they're through flow lakes or not. So Lake Bolac has Fiery Creek flowing into it and out of it. So water continually flows through it. Lake Corangamite just has water flowing into it. So all the salt that's brought into Lake Corangamite by the water flowing in just stays in Lake Corangamite. It's not going anywhere else, and it's built up over time and made the lakes quite saline. Okay, so what about the volcanoes? So as I said, the scoria cones made of volcanic ash have quite steep slopes, and they're also favoured sites for quarries. So a lot of the scoria cones in Western Victoria have quarries on the sides. The lava shields are much gentler in profile. They're just formed of lava flows that flowed out across the landscape. The difference between the two is just dependent on the amount of dissolved gas in the basalt. So the basalt magma beneath the surface contains dissolved gases. The main dissolved gas is water. The second most common one is carbon dioxide. And if it contains a large amount of dissolved gas, as it comes to the surface, the gas bubbles can expand as the pressure is released, and they can be quite explosive and blow bits of volcanic ash into the air, and they then roll down the sides of the volcano and accumulate. So what they look like is this. This is a scoria cone, and they're often called fire fountain eruptions. So each one of those tracks there is a bit of volcanic ash or volcanic block, or the big ones sometimes are called volcanic bombs, and they then roll down the sides of the volcano and give you quite steep slopes. As I said, these have frequently been quarried. So this is a quarry on Mount Fyans. The black and the reddish brown are both scoria. This is just more weathered. And this is built up as one of those fire fountain eruptions. And then it's very attractive for quarrying for road metal and for lightweight cement aggregate and things like that. This is Mount Nurat. So this is a volcanic complex. So this is one of the examples where we count this as a single volcanic center, but it has a series of different eruption points. So I think there's at least 5 there. And then down here, this is Mount Porndon. So in the center, there's a scoria cone. But this area out here, that line of vegetation marks a small cliff line that's the edge of a fairly thick lava flow that was the last eruption to come out of Mount Porndon and forms this fairly extensive lava shield. So this is Mount Shank across the border in South Australia. This erupted about 5,000 years ago. There are indigenous legends about that eruption that have been passed down for 5,000 years, which is pretty significant. This eruption here is a scoria cone, as we can tell from the steep slopes, and there's no lava flows associated with it. This plain that we see here is not a basalt lava plain, it's a limestone plain. And within the limestone plain are these holes called cenotes, which are filled with very clear water, and they're favoured diving locations. You have to get qualifications and special permission to be able to dive in these, but I had permission at one stage to be able to snorkel in them, and even snorkeling in them is magnificent because the water is so clear. It's absolutely beautiful. The origin of the caves is a bit uncertain, but one possibility is that they were dissolved by carbon dioxide released during these nearby eruptions. As I said, one of the main gases associated with volcanic eruptions is carbon dioxide. And there are, in fact, some wells, some bores nearby, a bit closer to the South Australian border, that were drilled initially looking for oil and gas. But what they found was a reservoir containing carbon dioxide that was trapped below the ground. And when they analysed that carbon dioxide, it has the specific isotopic ratios and trace gas contents that indicate it was originally released during a volcanic eruption. So there's no doubt that in this area there has been abundant carbon dioxide released during the eruptions, and it seems plausible that that could have dissolved these caves that have since been filled with water. Okay, so just going back to the map again, I just want to talk now about these blue and yellow dots down here, which are maars, M-A-A-R. So a maar is a really explosive eruption. These eruptions have been likened to small nuclear blasts. And what we think happens here, and the reason that they're all localized in one area, is that this area here, underneath the basalt, is an extensive area of limestone, the Port Campbell limestone. And within the Port Campbell limestone, there are various cave systems. So it seems plausible that as the magma was coming to the surface, it encountered a water-filled cave and instantly superheated the water to steam and caused a really explosive steam eruption that blasted this circular crater through the overlying rock. Now, around the edges of the crater, there's small cliff lines, and then it dips away, and this material around the edge of the crater through here is all volcanic ash. And it contains bits of limestone that have been blasted out as a result of this explosive eruption. There are a whole series of these maars. This is Lake Purrumbete, and this is Lake Keelumbete. Oh, and I should point out that all the oblique aerial photographs in this talk were all taken by my friend Neville Rosengren. Tower Hill, which some of you may know, near Warrnambool, is another example of a maar complex, and it also has some scoria cones associated with it as a later phase of the eruption. So what are some other interesting things about the basalt lavas in Western Victoria? Well, one of them is that the lava flows flowed down valleys, but they only flow down a valley from where they erupted. So this is Mount Napier here. That's the Mount Napier National Park. This is the Harmon Valley flow going out down through here. This is Budgebim, Mount Eccles here, and then the Tirrandara flow goes down this way. That's Lake Conda there, where the eel traps are. This lava flow from Budgebim here blocked off this valley and turned this whole area here into a swamp, which is called Conda Swamp. Lake Conda is where the eel traps are down here. And likewise, the Mount Napier eruption blocked off a valley here and turned this area here into a swamp called Buckley Swamp. And one of the ways that the people have tried to date the eruptions is to date the swamp material and see when it first started forming. But blocked river valleys, blocked by lava flows, forming swamps, are very common right across Western Victoria. So in this particular case, this is the topography again. So we can see here's the river valley that was quite swampy. And this one up here as well, at Buckley Swamp and Conda Swamp, Mount Napier and Budgebim. This is the magnetics again, so we can see that lava flow flowing down the Harmon Valley from Mount Napier and then down this way. And what appears to have happened here is some of the lava flows from Budge Bim actually went back up this valley and dammed it just here. So we can see underneath the swamp is a lava flow that must have come from here, except for this area up here, where the lava flow dammed the valley here and caused that to become quite swampy up through there. And when we look at the radiometrics, those areas of the swamps are quite dark because they're damp ground, and the water stops the gamma rays being emitted towards the atmosphere from the underlying lava. So there is actually lava underneath that swamp there that's this age here, but it's covered by damp ground, and that's why it looks dark on this image. Just a few other things about the Western District and how we can map individual lava flows. So the topographic images that I've showed you are all reasonably low resolution radar images that were obtained from a shuttle mission that the Americans flew, the Endeavour mission, quite a while ago. Since then, there's much more accurate topographic data that's become available, and that's from something called LIDAR. So if you're not familiar with LIDAR, the L basically, it actually stands for light, but it actually uses a laser. So in this case, a plane flies over the area, it's got a laser, it fires the laser at the ground, and it records the reflection of the laser from the ground, because the laser light is so intense that you'll get a reflection even from grass and dirt and stone and trees. So this is a Google Earth image. There's a little salt lake here, and these three crosses here mark three volcanoes. Now, they're not very obvious on this Google Earth image, but they are more obvious on this image, which is the low resolution topography of the area, the radar topography. When we look at the gamma radiation, we can see that the lava flows from these volcanoes are a bit brownish in colour. So I'm guessing that these are probably somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million years old. The red colour that we see here is due to salt precipitation in the soil around the lake, which is black because it's got water in it. This is the higher resolution imagery. So you can see out here is the low resolution topography, and then in here is the high resolution topography. So we can see the details amazingly well. So you can actually trace out very accurately the extent of the lava flows coming out of each of these small volcanoes, and this one down here as well. So there are small eruptions, but the laser data, just LIDAR data, gives you so much information. So there's LIDAR data available for large parts of Western Victoria, but it's not publicly available, most of it. Corangamite Shire flew this data, which they made available to us under a research agreement. So I can't make it available to anybody else, alas. But you can approach Corangamite Shire and arrange access yourselves if you think that would be useful. And you can zoom right in, and the amount of detail that you can see with LIDAR imagery is absolutely amazing. So the resolution on these images is about 1 metre. You can get better resolution than that, but the files become enormous, and frankly, for the sort of things we're looking at, 1 metre resolution is plenty. The other thing you'll probably notice is you can see the roads very easily. You can see farm dams really easily. You can see the way the fields have been ploughed. There's an amazing amount of information available. Okay, so I might finish off by talking a bit about Melbourne. So Melbourne lies on the eastern edge of the lava field. And the easternmost lava field is lava flow is this one here, which came from Mount Fraser, which is just there. This lava has been dated at around about 800,000 years. It flowed from Mount Fraser and then into the Yarra Valley and extended actually all the way down. So in outcrop, you can see it down this far. But the drilling that's been done for engineering works in Melbourne shows that it actually extends all the way down to Spencer Street Bridge. In the subsequent 800,000 years, the Yarra River has cut down along the sides of that and formed its present fairly narrow valley. So this is Mount Fraser. If you don't know where it is, you've all passed it because this is the Hume Freeway. We're looking south here. So this is Melbourne CBD over this way. But the Hume Highway actually veers around Mount Fraser. So you've all driven past it. And if you didn't recognise it at the time, you can do so next time you drive up that way. And in terms of the area that it actually covers, so this is the Plenty River through here, Darebin Creek and Mary Creek, and of course the Yarra down here. And we can see that it covered really large areas to the north of Melbourne. And it's 800,000 years old, so it still shows stony rises. So you can see these rises through here, and down the bottom here you can see a typical stony rise in that area with quite a lot of stones visible on the rise. In between the rises, because it's quite old, there's been a lot of clay washed off the rise itself and filled in the surrounding area, which is now quite swampy. That's the edge of the 800,000 year lava flow. And out here is a much older lava flow, about 2 million years old. And you can see how smooth the surface of this is compared to the quite rough surface of this one. And I couldn't really talk about basalt in Victoria without talking about basalt in Melbourne itself. So basalt is a big part of Melbourne. It's locally called bluestone. It's been used really extensively for buildings, pavements and curbstones, and it's had a really strong influence on the appearance of the city. So this is basalt here. These are basalt blocks here. This is a basalt pavement outside Spencer Street, Southern Cross Station. These are basalt curbstones. So there's a quarry near Port Fairy which supplies all these curbstones. And I spoke to someone who was involved in looking after Melbourne streets, and we asked him about why they still use basalt. And he said, it has this dark grey colour, which some people don't like, they find it a bit dull, but it doesn't show chewing gum. And he regarded that as a really big plus. And if you're looking at basalt curbstones or basalt blocks and you're not sure about whether it's basalt or whether it's concrete, if you see any of these trails through it of gas bubbles, then it's definitely identified as basalt. Okay, and these are a whole lot of references on basalts in Western Victoria, just the main ones on the dating actually, and some on descriptions of the basalt flows. There's quite an extensive literature on Western Victorian basalts, and I can pass that on to you if you so desire. So I might stop there and open it up to questions.
Wow, that was absolutely fascinating. I'll never be able to look at a rocky rise again the same way. And it's really interesting that you could see the difference in the vegetation. I mean, I know that sheep would have made a difference to that, but presumably the rockiness would encourage more the sort of scrubby, escarpment sort of shrubs and so on, rather than the grasslands in those.
Yeah. So I'm not a botanist, but I have been out in that area with botanists a number of times, and they've pointed out how there's different vegetation on the rises compared to the swales, the troughs in between them. But sheep, as you're all aware, I'm sure, love a lot of those native grasses, and they eat them right down to the ground.
Yeah.
To say nothing of yam daisies.
Yes, and orchids and everything else.
Nice.
So any questions? Jimbo, you're waving. You're on mute.
Yeah, got it. Sorry, don't do these often. Look, John, I live next to the Plenty Gorge, and I do stuff with Parks Victoria there, and we have some quarries here that have water within them, and they talk about some of the salinity in these basalt quarries that are filled with water. What type of salts would we expect that salinity to be? Are they like carbonate salts or?
No, it's mostly chlorides. So it's mostly sodium chloride table salt. And the reason for that is the salt came from the rainfall, and the salt in the rainfall mostly comes from sea spray, particularly close to the coast. As you get inland, you get a bit of dust in rainfall as well, so you get more calcium and carbonate. But close to the coast, it's dominated by sodium and chloride.
Thanks for that. I just wondered because often, you get these carbonate globules in basalt.
Yes. Oh, yes. So if you evaporate that water, the first mineral to evaporate will be calcium carbonate. Sodium chloride doesn't evaporate, doesn't precipitate until you've evaporated it a lot, because it's so much more soluble than calcium carbonate. Yeah, so a lot of the white stuff you see is carbonate, but the dominant salt is the chloride.
Thanks for that.
I was also remiss in not acknowledging the traditional lands that we're all meeting on, and for me that's the Wiradjuri Woiwurrung, but I was interested to hear that the Mount Shank over in South Australia has stories associated with its eruption, which, as you said, for 5,000 years to carry those stories is quite amazing.
Yeah, it is. So there's a couple of papers that have been published on that that I can refer you to if you're interested.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Yeah. Any other questions? I think you've rendered everyone done with so much information.
I've got one. Hi, John.
Hi.
We work a lot in sort of the interface areas between sedimentary rock and basalt, and sometimes it's quite hard to understand why some areas are basalt and some are sedimentary. Sometimes it's easy. You've got basalt right up to a creek, and then sedimentary or granite on the other. But then sometimes you've got caps of basalt at the tops of hills, and then the slope all the way down to the creek doesn't have much basalt at all. And I've always wondered if that was just due to rain erosion, but I wondered if you had any info on that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I'd probably have to look at the individual sites, because things vary quite a lot. So in some cases, the capping is a volcano, and so that's where it was erupted from, and the surrounding area has been eroded away. In other cases, there's been quite extensive erosion, and you just get these little remnants of the original lava flows. But if, I mean, I'm happy for people to email me afterwards with particular questions. If you had a particular area that you're interested in like that, if you send me the location, I can have a look at and see what I can work out for you.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that.
So there's a few comments in the chat.
Yes. Thank you. Can you read them? Are you happy to just?
Yeah. So can you comment on the age of the older basalt in Melbourne? So the basalts I talked about in this talk were all what they call newer volcanics, which are basically younger than 8 million years. There are also older volcanics in the Melbourne area, and a lot of those are around about 20 million years old. And because they're so old, they're really, really weathered. So some of them are actually hard even to recognise as basalt. They've become so weathered. And that's probably the quickest comment to that. The best place to learn in a bit more detail about the flows through the inner west suburbs of Melbourne. Perhaps if you once again could tell me exactly where you're interested in, I can point you towards some various maps that delineate the different basalt lava flows in the inner west, because there's been quite a lot of dating done in that area. Yes, the maps. A lot of the maps are in theses, honours theses and stuff like that, but I do have a compilation of all the dates that I'd be happy to make available.
Are you happy to share your email in the chat as well in that case? Or yeah.
Yep, so
There's another question in there from, do basalt flows create riverbeds?
So that's my email address.
Thank
Basalt flows don't really create riverbeds. They generally fill riverbeds in. And what often happens, like the Yarra, is so the basalt flow partially filled in the valley of the Yarra. But the Yarra was actually able to cut down, erode down beside the basalt and go back to probably close to its original depth. So basalt lava flows certainly modify riverbeds, but they don't actually create riverbeds. The age of the volcanic cones north of west of Portland. Ooh, I'd have to check that. And there's a comment there saying Neville Rosengren did a report on Merri Creek. Yes, Neville Rosengren has done a number of reports on the Western District basalts, actually, and he continues to work on them. I went out with him a few months ago looking at a site. I can try and put something together, some of the references together on that, that it's relevant to particular areas. Yep.
Hi, John. We've been looking at a site near Mount Fraser, and it's got a spring on it with the crayfish. Is it? I think that's scoria cone. Is that right? Did you say Mount Fraser?
Mount Fraser is scoria cone.
Yeah. Would that be salty then coming out of there, or would that be fresher coming out of something like that?
Is the spring close to the cone?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say it'd probably be pretty fresh.
Yeah, the crayfish seem to like it. So
yeah, what we find in general is the water, where water can seep into the ground quickly, rainfall, and become groundwater fairly quickly, like on scoria cones, which are very porous. Then there's not much evaporation or transpiration affects the rainfall before it becomes groundwater, so it stays pretty fresh. But out on the basalt plains, particularly the ones that have got thick clay-rich soils, the rainfall that falls on the soil seeps through the clay really slowly. And as it seeps through the clay, it gets affected by evaporation and transpiration. So it just becomes more and more saline.
yeah,
So
right.
the further away you are from the cones out on the clay-rich plains, generally the saltier the groundwater.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's really close, and it's actually like a direct, directly underneath the slope running away. So
yeah.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Thank you. It's amazing.
Yep, and Louisa's given us the reference to Neville Rosengren's report on the Merri Creek geology, so that's good.
Amazing. Well, that seems to cover everything. Everyone wants a map, wants to see where they're living and what's on it, which is quite understandable. I do too. We've got basalt quarries all down the Maribyrnong River where I am, so I know there's a lot there. Okay, well, if no one else has any more questions, then oh, hold on, great talk. Logan Book, Mount Franklin in Hepburnshire. Is it a scoria cone?
Mount Franklin, I think so. I haven't actually, I've seen Mount Franklin in the distance and it looks pretty steep-sided to me. So I think it is a scoria cone, but I can check for you.
Yeah.
If everyone who had a question who wants an answer, if you email me, I will endeavour to answer your questions.
Am I on?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Thanks very much for a great talk, Sean. I'm particularly interested in the immediate west of Melbourne. Example, Mount Cottrell and its influence on the landscape. Because I'm wondering how old the Werribee River Valley is, and the Maribyrnong and the Little River, and if they're all connected by or connected in the past by a lava flow, which might have come from Mount Cottrell. And how old would that flow have been? Is it one of the older ones, the 20 million one, or 8 million, or the 800,000? As in the
so, I do have a map of the area around Mount Cottrell with a number of dates on it. My memory is that the flows around there are about 2 million years, quite a few of them anyway. But I'd have to check that to be sure. The river valleys through there, like Little River and the Werribee, have actually cut through that basalt. So they've had 2 million years to cut through it. And so they're all younger than those basalt flows.
Yep. Okay. So does that have any connection with the Rowsley Fault and the slipping of the Port Phillip Sunclans?
The Rowsley Fault, you can see in places that the basalt lavas come up against the bottom of the Rowsley Fault. So part of the uplift had occurred before the eruption. But in other places, you can see that there are lavas that go across the fault and they've actually been cracked along the fault. So there's been a number of phases of movement on that fault, some of them before the basalt eruptions and some of them after. I used to take students out there to show them the Rowsley Fault, and we used to actually drive up the fault at the near the Anakies. And one of the things I always used to tell them was that this is a pretty big fault. There's a couple of 100 meters of movement on this fault, at least.
And that was an uplift.
Yeah, a significant uplift. And big faults like that, often there's a residual energy because there's been so much energy expended on them with that amount of uplift. There's often a little residual bit of energy. And as you drive across, particularly in a big metal vehicle like a bus, you can often get just a faint buzz of the energy in the fault as you drive across it. And as we drove across the fault, I used to go, oh, there it was. And quite a number of the students used to believe me.
Cool.
Yeah.
There is a question there also about Mount Buninyong, which I think John may have answered with a reference.
Yeah. Yep. There's a reference there for that, and I think that's from Neville Rosengrant.
Draw a line under the questions there, otherwise we'll have people asking about their backyards for the rest of the night. But yeah, that's very kind of you to offer your email to anyone that wants a bit more specific information about the areas that they know and love the best. So thank you for that. And if everyone would just like to, another big thank you to John for that amazing, very interesting talk. That
You're welcome.
Makes a lot more sense of the landscape for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people the same.